Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on what's happening in your school district. Plus, we have passed the bill deadline here in Sacramento. We've got all of the details on the latest bills that are out, plus what comes next in the process.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it is just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA's Executive Director. I'm Naj Alikan, ACSA's Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We are happy to have you back here after taking a week off. Edgar, how are you?
I'm doing good, Naj. I'm happy to be back. I'm actually excited about the topic today. I'm excited about all the topics. You know, we can't say one is better than the other, but it actually feels good to be talking legislation. I will admit there's times over the last couple months where somebody asked me about a bill number, and I have to admit, like, that wasn't my strength even when I was in Yvonne's role. Like, I didn't have every bill memorized.
Right.
Even more so now, obviously, the new gig takes me in a few different directions. But, we have a fabulous team on top of that. But I'm glad that we're going to get to dig in a little bit on the legislative side today.
Yeah, that's right. Yvonne Carrillo and Barrett Snyder will join us in just a couple of moments. Want to say hello to Robert Adams, Mark Campbell. Lester Powell was the very first person on our chat today. And Lester has Happy Wellness Wednesday. I am interested, Lester, if you'll throw this into the chat. Edgar, you and I had an experience at our leadership assembly last Thursday where we did a whole segment on wellness. I have yet to have heard of Wellness Wednesday. So Lester, if you want to jump in with some details on that, we're interested in hearing what you have to say. A couple of news items for you right off the top before we get into our main topic today. A reminder for you, on February 28th, the state COVID state of emergency will officially come to an end. That was actually announced in October, but we wanted to make sure you remembered about that date, officially February 28th. Accordingly, the state believes it has the tools needed to continue fighting COVID-19 should there be a surge post February 28th. Edgar, we have seen a few pockets in the state after the start of 2023, where there has been some reinstatement of masking. They've been in just little pods in elementary schools, mainly in a classroom. But Edgar, it is good to hear that we've hit this date, the COVID state of emergency officially coming to an end. It is good to hear, but now we go into the process of if local health agencies see something, that they would have to be the people that step in on this.
Yeah, now, as we talked about, I think a few months ago, maybe it was, that the fact that we haven't talked about COVID all that much in recent weeks and recent months, probably a good sign. And as you noted, the governor gave a long on-ramp on this quote unquote end of the state of emergency. The real technical piece is that most of the pieces impacting schools, those were relaxed some time ago, right? I think this bigger piece that you talk about, the power that public health has, as public messaging goes, it's not like COVID's gone by the day. We still see kids missing school, our educators have to miss school. But in terms of the bigger mitigation efforts, I think the state has ramped that down, and it's been a while. And we can, and even though this ends the official state of emergency, as you mentioned, there's still the ability to pivot as necessary. Especially, I think we're all going to get into the routine here as we get into the cold weather months, that we'll have spikes and whatnot. I think we've all made peace that this is going to be with us, but that we can get back to, and it feels that way. I mean, the one sentiment we hear from our folks this year is that this school year, more so than what we've had over the last number of years, that this one, while normal might not be a thing anymore, that at least we've been able to get to some of our core functions, both in and out of the classroom.
Yeah, I appreciate that you said normal, because who knows what normal will look like. I want to bring your attention today to a story that was in the Los Angeles Times about rural school districts. And it's a story you should probably read, especially because 60% of these school districts here in the state are considered small or rural. The story talks about 4 Northern California school district leaders who go to Capitol Hill advocating for badly needed federal funding to keep their school communities operational and supporting students. So I want to set this up for you. In these communities, the logging industry was king. And because of the vast amounts of federal land that you couldn't tax, the U.S. Forest Service was making payments for these schools. But of course, as you know, the logging industry plummeted in the early 90s and the money started to go away. Now, Congress passed a bill in 2000 to fund these districts. It was a short-term solution. It was only supposed to be 6 years in length. Congress has never made this permanent, and instead they've reauthorized some version of this bill that was passed in 2000 9 times. And it's reached the point where it's kind of this little hanger-on, toss it in at the end of something else. Calls for making it permanent come from both sides of the aisle and, of course, environmentalists, but politics, as you would expect, playing a big role. And the latest funding program is set to expire in October. I want to read you 2 quotes here. The first one, this is from Assemblywoman Megan Dolly, the vice chair of the California State Assembly on Education. She says, having school administrators plead for Federal Reserve dollars every few years is not sustainable, and they don't have the resources of bigger districts for expenses like grant writing. She goes on to say, we need to solve the funding issue once and for all and get back to the business of educating our students. Of note, Megan Dolly will be on the show in 2 weeks, so mark your calendar for that. March 8th, we'll go ahead and talk about this particular story. But Edgar, you and I were talking this morning when we were reading this story. A lot of details that I was not aware about, specifically for those school districts that have a lot of federal land around them, so they don't get that type of tax money. And of course, you know, there's the attendance issue and the educator shortage issue in these particular areas. There was so much in this story, Edgar. I was really surprised to learn a lot about this.
Yeah, well, first off, I was really pleasant. Obviously, the issue that it's at hand, it's a challenging one. It's a difficult one. I think the article does a great job of really articulating some of the, like, as you said, the unique challenges that especially small rural schools in some of these communities really face. I was pleasantly surprised that the LA Times, arguably the biggest newspaper we have in our state, was talking about rural schools in its publication. I think one of the things that we're trying to be sensitive to, and I'll be the first to admit that we need to pay more attention to our smalls, our rurals, our frontier districts, for all the reasons you stated. That the majority of our school districts, maybe they're not the ones that get all of the attention all the time, but the majority of our school districts are small, are rural. So I think it is important for us to keep that spotlight on it. I know one of our guests, Barrett Snyder, you know, one of their clients is the Small School Districts Association, and they're always trying to push this piece. So our partnership with that sector of our community, I think, is important. And I was pleasantly surprised to have some attention paid to their plight. And then just kudos to those members, right? Especially you think about the role of a small, and all of them happen to be superintendents. I think there was a couple of principal superintendents in the group that they got their hands full. It's all hands on deck, right? Where they're the site administrator, they're the superintendent, they're the chief advocate, they're the chief communications person. And I think this was demonstrated. So just a lot of gratitude to those folks who are really taking up the cause and took it directly into their own hands by traveling to DC and having their voices heard.
Yeah, and we'll continue to follow this story because, as we said, the funding comes to an end in October. That gives a lot of opportunity for advocacy, continued advocacy, but I will be interested to follow what happens in Congress. Can our congressional leaders actually come to some type of federal funding? It will be interesting to see. So we'll go ahead and continue to monitor that. Okay, let's bring our guests in today. Let's talk about that bill deadline inside the state capitol and what comes next. Yvonne Carrillo is ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. Barrett Snyder, partner over at Capital Advisors. Yvonne and Barrett, so good to have you both here on the show. You know what? Let me start with both of you. 1/4 of the legislature is new this term. A few months into the session, what differences are you seeing in terms of approaches and priorities? Barrett, we'll start with you.
Sure. And thanks, guys, for having me. I always enjoy being on. Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing to note right off the bat is in education, we have 2 new chairs of both policy committees. Assemblymember O'Donnell chose not to run for re-election. He's gone replaced by Assemblymember Muratsuchi down from the Torrance area. And then on the Senate side, we've got Senator Newman, who took over for Connie Leyva, who left and chose not to run for re-election. So you got sort of 2 new sheriffs in town. And I think one of the things we've detected as we've read through these bills, at least an initial pass, is you've got folks that are trying to go after some things, particularly in the curriculum space, where Assemblymember O'Donnell, for example, had basically told lawmakers, don't even bring me a bill that deals with curriculum changes. We're just not going to get out of my committee. And so you've got, I think we counted 25-ish bills in the curriculum area where they want to, do everything from, there's a bill on teaching handwriting. There's a couple bills on financial literacy, parental rights around sort of, what's the right of a parent to review curriculum, some of that stuff that's playing out nationally, career technical education, some other things. So that's a theme that I'm picking up early is going after some pride things, and a lot of other ideas creeping back. I mean, I'm sure we're going to talk about Portantino's bill around average daily membership and trying to get back at some version of an enrollment-based funding model, things like that, things that weren't successful last session that are back. So those are some of my initial ones. Oh, and then the last one would be health. Student health generally is a major topic. A lot of fentanyl bills, mental health bills. Those to me seem like the early themes here.
And Yvonne?
Yeah, in terms of the new legislative crop, I think what we're seeing play out thus far is very much consistent with our initial assessment of the candidates and now legislators. As our members know, we went through a really extensive process of vetting candidates, of meeting with them, endorsing a number of them, and I mean it in a positive fashion. I think it's again consistent with what we heard expressed to us and the sense we got from them during that vetting process is they've come in with a lot of enthusiasm, rolling their sleeves up, ready to make their mark right out the gate. They've been by and large accessible. I think they're continuing to communicate, wanting to collaborate with statewide ACSA and school leaders in their communities. So I give them credit for that. I also think, just unsurprisingly, is they lack the historical context that one gets and the benefit of serving in the legislature, reviewing bills, having been here for really consequential decisions. They didn't have the benefit of being here for recent conversations as it relates to education policy. So there is a real need by us, by our members, to really lay a solid foundation and talk about a lot of education policy basics that maybe we didn't have to spend time on in the past with members who had been here for many years and had dug in on these policies.
Hey Barrett, thanks for being with us again. Most of the time you answer, we call, and you always find a way to be on here. So we appreciate you the partnership from both you and your firm here. We had Al Muratsuchi, the chair of the Assembly Education Committee, with us a couple weeks ago, and he talked about 2 general priorities. It was addressing the pandemic learning loss, as they called it, learning loss and recovery, and then also the broader education shortage. Now that we're past kind of the deadline, are we seeing these themes play out in the proposed legislation that has been introduced thus far?
Yeah, we're seeing that from a number of members, including him, and I think we might even see more of it. One of the things to point out, I think, is first of all, there are over 2,700 bills are introduced, and Edgar, you've been doing this a long time, and we both know that's unusual for the first year of a session. It's a lot, and then of those, there are just so many of them that are unsurprisingly spot bills, which are bills that, they've got a title and it says we're going to do something with curriculum. And then there's not much there. So we know in the coming weeks, we're going to get a lot of amendments. And a lot of these bills are going to turn into things that, just based on what we're seeing, are going to be in the areas that you're acknowledging. Teacher shortage is a major issue. And so is the sort of learning recovery, learning loss, COVID stuff. We're seeing those themes definitely in here. A lot of bills from Assemblymember Maratsuchi this year. Big issue. He's got the bond bill. He's got some CTE bills. He's got a couple of other things. Senator Newman, on the other hand, he's only got about 5. I think he even told some folks he's only going to do about 5 bills. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two chairs sort of grab a hold of the education policymaking agenda in the legislature and where they take it. But I think when he was telling you those were themes, I think that's really important for us is, he's going to be working with the members that bring bills through his committee to really advance those things in ways I think that are going to be very helpful to us and things that I think we're largely going to want to support as they move through.
Folks, I want to remind you, if you have questions for Yvonne or Barrett, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and get to those by the end of the show. Yvonne, in addition to the themes, pandemic, learning loss, and educator shortage, what additional themes are we seeing as focus areas as we start up this session?
Yeah, responding to the fentanyl overdoses and deaths that we're seeing statewide, nationally, is getting a lot of attention. And it's clear that our policymakers see a role for schools in this fight. So the governor, as has been talked about here on previous episodes, has put forth a proposal related to schools and having opioid overdose medication at school sites. There's bills that would do the same thing, extending that and applying it to include also elementary schools and not just middle and high schools. But just the fentanyl crisis broadly is getting a lot of attention. It's not just for schools, but again, it's clear that our policymakers see a role for school sites. So we're examining those, digging into those. There's always a lot of layers to these. We've been hearing from you all, from our members, about availability of this medication, storage, proper storage on school sites, liability. So we're digging into those. But another theme that we're seeing a kind of a shift in focus is the greening of school sites. And so we've seen a lot of attention related to climate change proposals for a number of years, real significant proposals. But now we're seeing a real focus on school sites and trying to respond to these really extreme temperatures that we're seeing across the state. And trying to make sure that school facilities are better suited to respond to those, and making sure that kids are safe on school sites when there are really is extreme heat taking place in school communities. So these take a lot of different shapes in terms of the legislative proposals that are being put forth. You see a competitive grant, you see real strict requirements as it relates to school building and school modernization. You see action plans related to this that would have to be required of LEAs. So again, as always, devil's always in the details, and we're digging in. But this is something that will continue to be debated and discussed for the entirety of this legislative session.
Barrett, I have a question, and I think I'm going to know the answer given what the statistics she threw out at the beginning about how many bills or how many education-related bills. But one of the things I've been thinking about is, given the change in the fiscal environment, and we've talked about this on the show. You folks have talked about it through your workshops. It's been a big theme, right? How this landscape is changing, even though education hasn't really been hit yet. For the most part, we've been spared. The overall fiscal environment is starting to be different, right? So there's frankly just not going to be as much money as that there once was. Now, the flip side of that, and it doesn't always translate, is does the legislature, how is this influencing the members in terms of throwing out ideas that most of them cost money? Or one of the things that we've been talking about, even if it doesn't cost money, the people piece, given the human capital issues that our school system have been facing, to what extent do you think the legislature, especially the new policymakers, do you think they're sensitive to this environment? Is that playing out in terms of the bills that are being introduced thus far?
Yeah, this fiscal environment is a great question, because I think this fiscal environment is one of the most interesting aspects of this session. And you hit on a couple of things. One, because to be frank, I think there are a lot of bad bills out there that, as lobbyists, we have to, try and go and kill them, or, make them better or kill them. In a fiscal environment like this, where, the money is drying up, we just kind of let the appropriate committees kill a lot of these things. There's just no money. If your bill requires anyone to make a photocopy, it's going to die in this kind of fiscal environment. So that can be helpful when you're trying to get rid of bad ideas. But the other element is, you got a lot of new lawmakers, as you guys have highlighted. Some of them are going to get that. I mean, some of them are former staffers, so they'll get it. Like, Greg Hart, for example, Assembly member from the Central Coast. He worked for Jack O'Connell for a long time. He kind of gets it. But you'll have a lot of new members who are going to find that dynamic out quickly, that bills die quickly in the Appropriations Committee in years when there's not a lot going on in the budget. So I think it'll be a learning year for some folks. And the fiscal dynamic will also kill some bills that, we're tracking around, folks wanting to insert things into the state budget through legislation. I mean, at this point, unless they get, their issue as a priority for legislative leadership, it's probably not going to make it. But you'll see a lot of those bills every year when we're seeing them this year. So yeah, the fiscal environment is going to eat a lot of stuff this year, in my estimation.
Yvonne, let me ask you this question that came in from Robert Adams. He asked, with many of these new bills being spot bills, does this give us the ability to try and flex those topics with conversation before the amendments come, or is it just a wait and see type of thing?
No, there's definitely opportunity there, and it's definitely not a wait and see. It's really critical for us to be very active, which the team is, in having conversations directly with policymakers, their own personal staff in legislative offices, but also additionally with education committee staff as well, who is often the first to be notified by legislative offices of interest in certain topics and helping vet policy proposals. So by us doing the legwork now and getting out in front of things and taking it back to our members and relaying the perspectives of our members, it just makes it better, ensures that once these bills are amended, if they do happen to be amended, it's in a much better place and has some initial input that is provided by ACSA in shaping. But I would just further put that there's certainly many more months of engagement and advocacy and amendments that are undoubtedly going to be needed on so many of these proposals as well. But certainly the advocacy and the shaping of policy begins now with bills that are in the spot form.
Barrett, I'll ask you another question that we got from Dr. Lee. And basically the question was, what kind of professional development would you recommend in response to kind of the legislative landscape? And hopefully we catch this right. But I take that as like, how can we educate? What can we do given all of the variables that both of you have pointed out? What do you recommend on that end?
My favorite takeaway on any time we have these kind of conversations is go build relationships with your local lawmakers and their staff. Make sure they understand how things are going in your district and build that relationship, because then when you have input on bills where you think somebody's going down, your lawmaker's going the wrong direction on something, you've got a relationship that you can jump in on, and it's not just you're calling because you need something or because you're cranky about something. Relationship building is one of the most important pieces of being an effective advocate. And so that starts with your local state senator, your state assembly member, state member of Congress, House of Representatives, stuff like that. And just build that relationship and start before you need something. Don't just call the first time when you're grumpy or you need them to get you a tour at the Capitol. Have it be about
I've never seen our folks be grumpy though.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So just reach out now and don't really have an agenda. I want you to get to know me, and I want to get to know you. I'm the superintendent. I'm the CBO. I'm the whatever in this district. I'm a resource to you. That's just an effective way to do it.
Hey, let me ask both of you this question, and Yvonne, we'll start with you. Is there a surprise out there, Bill Wise, something you didn't expect to see, something that you did see and think could look a lot different by the time we get to signing off the budget in June? What can you tell us? Yvonne, we'll have you start.
Yeah, if I may, I'll just quickly piggyback off of what Barrett was talking about. And I would say don't overlook the relationships with staff as well in their district offices. Those are gold. So don't definitely prioritize time there as well. In terms of surprises, Barrett mentioned it at the front end. Maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but more than 2,200 bills have been introduced, and so that kind of shocked me. Just the amount of legislation that has been introduced, and we'll see how many of these actually stick and materialize and end up getting debated in policy committees. But it definitely seems more than what we've seen in years past, and maybe that's a reflection of a new crop coming in with a lot of ideas. But some of these are issues that have been well legislated that just don't seem to die, and that just continue to just come back year after year. One of my favorite topics, and maybe you could sense the sarcasm, is but that divestment of certain investments that our state pension systems hold. That's coming back again. Inter and intra-district transfers is coming up again. Barrett touched on it on the front end about high school graduation requirements. So more and more things being sought to be added without the removal of any current requirements. And so a lot of things that have seemed to be hashed out in years past, and policymakers that have been here maybe had moved away from are coming back.
And Barrett, what about you? Any surprises or anything that you think is going to look totally different by the time we sign off?
I was gonna say the handwriting bill. I don't know. You always every year you get some funny ones. Right? Really, we're gonna do that. And I love Sharon Quirk-Silva. It's her bill. She's excellent. But my prediction, there are a lot of bond bills this year, whether it's climate or flood or wildfire cleanup. There's a lot. I think folks are detecting that in an environment where you're not going to get a lot of legislation through because of the fiscal dynamic we've already talked about here, that bonding is a different story, because you're basically punting that before voters, and you put together a package where you're basically saying, let's go borrow some money to do some stuff. School bond is going to be one of those. And I think that's an element here that's going to play out somewhere between the legislative process and the budget process, given the fiscal circumstances. So I would keep an eye on the bonds generally. A lot of water, like clean water bonds kind of stuff, and because we got lead problems, as you guys know, around the state.
Yeah.
So water politics are kind of in the bond space will be fun too.
Barrett Snyder, partner at Capital Advisors, and Yvonne Carrillo, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. Barrett and Yvonne, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, you guys. Always fun.
Edgar, I want to point out Marv Davison, and I think that we probably would like to investigate this more before commenting. He puts in the comment section, Rice University published an article about a 6% loss a number of students in Texas and 3% loss in number of students in many states. There's a variety of reasons that they found for the loss of enrollment in public schools. Are we seeing a loss of enrollment to that same extent? I think it would be good for us to read the story before commenting on it. But I mean, we've heard about, the student population throughout the country. So some of the data points that we see here may not be substantially different than some of the other data that we see in other parts of this country.
I don't have the percentages off the top of my head, but I do know that, some of these trends we have seen in California. Now, the one piece that I think everybody's going to wait here, especially a year after, the worst of the pandemic, to see what happens with our numbers. And it's so easy to go back to COVID, everything, right? As much as I say, it's been nice not to talk about COVID. So many of our educational conversations go back to the pandemic. One of the things that's worth noting when we talk about loss of enrollment or ADA is that these were already trends that we were seeing before the pandemic, right? So I think, yes, we already were seeing a downward trend. How much what we experienced over the last couple of years impacted that, and where did these students go, and how much will we rebound, will be something that I think we'll all be dissecting as the next set of numbers come in this year.
Yeah. And let me ask you this one other question, because we didn't get to ask Barrett and Yvonne this question. This timeline now, since we've had the bill deadline, as we go through the process, how do things happen now behind the scenes? What do we know, and what do we don't know about what happens moving forward?
Yeah, it's a long process, and I think, as both of our friends stated there, 2,200 bills, a lot of those, will not either proceed. That, sometimes what you'll see happen, they'll get through the first committee because they're colleagues. If you're in the Senate, it's much harder to vote against the bill because it's your colleague from the Senate. So some of these will get out of committee, even some of those that, in our opinion, may not be the best ideas. And what we'll start seeing as they start going through the fiscal committee, hence this question about how much money do we have, those bills and ideas that cost money. Sometimes that gets prioritized, and some of those bills will go away. So it's a very, very long process that we'll see. First, they have to go through their first policy committee, then it has to go through a fiscal committee. We're in the first year of a 2-year session. Some of these ideas, it could take them up to 2 years to really cross the finish line. So even for those, we try not to get too excited by the introduction deadline. We have to track them. We have to do our due diligence. We have to go educate some folks, but there's a long way to go before any of these things actually become law.
2,000 plus bills. Seems like there's a lot of work ahead. Folks, if you like what you've seen and you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe on our YouTube page and our Facebook page when we're about to come live on the air, whether it's our regularly scheduled Wednesday show or any breaking news. You will find out with an alert by subscribing on our YouTube page. And if you have great stories happening in your school district, we want to tell those stories in EdCal. Go ahead and send those stories to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@acsa.org. That reminds me, I'll be in Carlsbad and San Marcos this week and take care of a couple of really great positive stories happening down in Southern California. Edgar, so good to see you.
Hey, Yvonne. I'm sorry, not Yvonne. Naj. You see, I usually don't mess up your name.
I know, it's usually me.
It's retribution there. I saw a question from all our friends in from Los Angeles in terms of arts allocation. I will say this is a major priority for us. We think we're getting some traction in terms of educating folks on that front. It also gives us a chance to make a connection that our good friend and leader, Maria Thompson, our biggest hype person as well, was talking about Ledge Action Day and how it would be a good opportunity. I can tell you that this will be a major focus, and us talking about the proposal to take away some of the discretionary money that schools got last year. So a lot more to come on that front. We'll have something to say in the weeks and months to come on that end.
You don't think that the post from Allah is Neri Pais and he's just kind of
he might be disguised. He may be using the wrong account, but but whether it be Allah or Neri himself, we're always happy to see our friends from down south.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, folks, so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. A reminder, we're here Wednesdays, live and interactive on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.